Welcome to Next Generation Nepal's Wisdom Wednesdays. My name is Martin Punaks, and I'm the Country Director for Next Generation Nepal. Next Generation Nepal is an American international NGO that's been working in Nepal for about 10 years. We work in the area of child trafficking to children's homes and orphanages in Nepal, which you're going to hear a lot about tonight. About 20 years ago, I volunteered in an orphanage in Peru. I now tell people not to do what I did. I tell people not to volunteer in orphanages, and I'm going to tell you why. So our story begins about 10 years ago, when Nepal was at the end of its 10-year civil war, and it starts with a man called Conor Grennan, who's the founder and president of Next Generation Nepal. There's a picture of him here, looking like he's squeezing a child's head, but I can assure you he's completely harmless if you meet him. Some of you know about Conor from his book, Little Princes, One Man's Promise to Bring Home the Lost Children of Nepal. Has anyone read Little Princes here? Okay, quite a few Little Princes fans, that's great. And did you enjoy it? Yes. You did, great. Well, it's a really good read, and I'd recommend you read it, not because we make any money out of it, because you can buy it in all the shops around here, but they're all Chinese rip-offs, so we don't get a single rupee from it. But the reason I'd recommend that you read it is because it's a really good book, it's a real page-turner, and you'll learn a lot about Nepal and a lot about child trafficking in Nepal, and how Next Generation Nepal began. For those of you that haven't read it, I'm going to spoil it for you, I'm afraid, because I'm going to tell you today what actually happens in the book, but I'm also going to tell you what happened after Little Princes and how Next Generation Nepal evolved. So Conor Grennan, he's from America, and he came here in 2005 on a round-the-world trip. He was volunteering, he wanted to volunteer. He signed up with a volunteering company, which he paid for, and they placed him in an orphanage in a village called Godavari, which is in the south of the Kathmandu Valley. So he went there, he met a French guy called Farid Mansour. They got on really well, and they were having a wonderful time volunteering in this orphanage. The orphanage was called Little Princes. And as far as they were concerned, they were volunteering with Civil War orphans. These were children who'd lost their parents in the Civil War. So they were doing really good, worthy work, helping these orphans. And about the first half of Little Princes is all about the fun he had, all the great times he had with these wonderful children, playing with them, football tournaments with other orphanages, taking them to the local baths and getting them washed, and all the funny things they'd say. And it's a real heartwarming story. And then one day, a terrible truth came out. One of the children told him that he wasn't in fact an orphan, that he had parents, and that he'd been trafficked. He'd been taken from his family, and he'd been placed in the orphanage, and he'd been told that he wasn't allowed to say that he wasn't an orphan. He'd been told he had to tell people, particularly foreigners, that he was an orphan. Understandably, this was shocking for Conor and for his friend Farid, and gradually the truth came out about all the children. They were all in the same situation. They'd all been taken from their families in another area of Nepal, and they'd all been told by the trafficker that they had to lie, they had to pretend they were orphans. Bit by bit, Conor and Farid started unravelling what was basically a huge Nepali trafficking ring. Other children started to appear around Kathmandu who were being brought from other areas of the city. Conor found 7 of these children. He promised to help them. They disappeared. He then set about trying to find them again with the help of people in the government. And bit by bit, what had started off as a wonderful experience in Nepal started to become quite shocking and quite upsetting when he started to discover where these children were coming from and the plight they'd been through and the fact that he'd been deceived as to what he was actually doing in Nepal. It turned out that many of these children had come from a district called Humla. Now, Humla is the most northwesterly district of Nepal. It's arguably the most remote district in Nepal. There's no roads to Humla. The only way in and out of Humla is by aeroplane, by small planes, or by walking in and out. And it can take over a week to walk in and out of Humla from the nearest road. It's a very, very remote district and a very, very poor district. This is a picture of Humla. It's a beautiful place. Some of you may have been there. It really is a stunningly attractive place to visit, but the poverty is overwhelming. It's a very harsh place to go to. And during the Civil War, the Maoist rebels were completely in control of Humla. And the Maoist rebels were forcibly conscripting children into the Maoist rebel army. Every family was told that they had to supply one child, one boy, to go to fight for the Maoists against the government. And if they didn't, the families would be harmed, people could be killed, the children would be taken anyway. Families really had no choice. They had to supply children to fight for the Maoist rebels. Obviously, this is very distressing for the families. No one wants their children to go and fight in a war. So some friendly social workers, shall we say, started offering the families an alternative. They said, look, if you pay us some money, we'll get your children out of Humla. We'll take them to Kathmandu. We'll send them to a good school, they'll get a good education. Kathmandu's hasn't been taken by the Maoists yet. It's still a safe place for your children to be. And when the conflict's over and everything's safe, we'll bring your children back again. They'll have an education, maybe they'll have good jobs, they'll have money, they'll look after you in old age. Now for these families, that was, what a choice. Either your child gets taken by the Maoists and possibly gets killed in a war, or you pay these friendly social workers some money and they take your child to safety, and you also are able to ensure that your child gets a good education and a bright future for your child and also for the whole family. Obviously, many, many families, hundreds of families, chose to send their children with these social workers, who were in fact child traffickers. When the children came to Kathmandu, the promises were not fulfilled. They were literally dumped on the outskirts of the valley in old buildings. They had to beg to get food, they were badly treated, they were possibly abused, some were trafficked on to India for other purposes. And it was at this point that the NGOs started noticing that these children were coming into Kathmandu and started moving in to try and help. And some of the NGOs put the children in children's homes, trying to help the children, believing that they were genuine orphans, with good intentions, not realising what had actually happened. The volunteering companies also started noticing that these children were there and had no support, so they started sending in volunteers. And the traffickers, from what initially was a way to try and make money from the families, they didn't really have a plan what to do with the children in Kathmandu, started realising that they could make money from the NGOs and the volunteering companies. They could charge the volunteering companies money to allow volunteers to come and work with the children. They could charge the NGOs money and say, well, we need money for food, for books, for school, for clothes, and they could cream a lot of that money off, so the money didn't necessarily get to the kids. And many of these children were rescued, shall we say, by NGOs and ended up in children's homes, where some were better looked after, some weren't. Some ended up being sent for inter-country adoption overseas. Some suffered other problems. But the key point I want you to remember is they were not orphans. They'd been separated from their families. Their families had been deceived. Now, Connor, he actually went back to America, but this stayed with him. He felt terrible about what had happened. And he decided to come back to Nepal and do something about it. And him and his friend Farid actually set about trying to find his children's families. They actually went to Humla. They found a local guide called DB Lama, and they trekked through the mountains. And Humla's a tough place to trek. I mean, the mountains are like that. So I've been there, and it almost killed me just walking for a few days. But they took photographs of the children, they took letters from the children, the details they had, and one by one they were able to locate these children's families. And understandably, it was a very emotional experience for these families, because many of them thought they'd never see their children again. They didn't really know what had happened. And by the end of Little Princess, Connor and Farid were able to actually reunify many of these children with their families. The Civil War was over, and they were able to take the children back to their families and provide the families with some support if they needed it, to ensure that the children could live there happily and sustainably and safely. So this is how NGN started doing reunification. And to this day, this is essentially still what Next Generation Nepal is about. We've developed a lot since the days of Connor and Fareed. Nowadays, it's not foreigners going out to villages looking for families, it's Nepali social workers who've been trained. We work with the government of Nepal. We rescue children from abusive and exploitative orphanages and children's homes, where most of the children are not orphans. And we find the families. Well, the first thing we do is we rehabilitate the children. Often they've been abused physically, mentally, psychologically, sometimes sexually. There's a picture here on the top right-hand side of the screen of a boy who was severely malnourished. It's called Daman. When we rescued him, he was 13 years old and he weighed just 18 kilos, which is about the same weight as my 4-year-old child at the time. 13-year-old boy weighing the same as a 4-year-old child. He'd been starved so he could raise money from people who wanted to donate for the orphanage. It was a good fundraising tool, but I'll come on to that later. We take photographs of the villages, we show parents, and then we work with the families until the time is right to take those children home and reunify them. Then we monitor those children, and we monitor the families to make sure that they're safe and they're not going to get re-trafficked. And I'm proud to say that we've reunified 164 children since that time, trafficked and displaced children. And we have a 100% success record. Not one of those children has been redisplaced or re-trafficked, because we put a lot of time and a lot of resources in making sure they can stay with their families safely. We also do a lot of preventative work. We work with families and work with vulnerable communities to help them understand that the promises that the traffickers give them are not true. Traffickers will tell families that we're going to give your children a good education. These days, families are not trying to save their children from the Civil War. That's all in the past now, but they're trying to save their children from poverty. And when someone comes along with a briefcase and is smartly dressed and maybe some nice jewellery and says, I can help your child, I'll get them to Kathmandu, we'll give them an education, we're from a reputable organisation. Many of these families they're quite naive, they're not well educated, they believe them and they let their children go, thinking they're doing the best thing for their children. When in fact, often these children end up in orphanages and children's homes, being used to raise money from foreign donors and volunteers. These are some pictures actually from earthquake-affected areas. The earthquake in many ways was similar to the conflict. The earthquake created a lot of vulnerability amongst families, a lot of fear, and a lot of traffickers started moving into the earthquake-affected areas, intentionally trying to displace children. A lot of children's homes would go there, trying to look for children and bring them back to Kathmandu so they could use them to try and raise money from the many, many, many generous foreign donors that wanted to support Nepal at that time. Okay, so many of you here have been to Nepali villages. You've seen the poverty, you've seen the problems in those villages, and you might be thinking, why is Next Generation Nepal taking children from children's homes and orphanages and taking them back to this poverty, taking them back to this hardship in the villages? Is that really in the best interest of children, for them to be growing up in such poverty, in such difficult circumstances? Well, let me tell you why we take children back to their families, why we believe this is in the best interest of children. It all starts with this chap here, a British man called John Balby. John Balby was a psychoanalyst from the UK who started writing in the 1950s and developed a theory called attachment theory. Now, attachment theory holds that for children to grow into healthy, emotionally balanced adults, they need to develop healthy emotional attachments with primary carers as young children. Now, for most of us who grew up in healthy, loving families, we grew up with a mother and a father, or a mother and a father, or possibly an uncle and aunt, or someone else that was important in our lives and cared for us. And we just take it for granted that as young children, we developed those healthy emotional attachments because we were cared for by one or two people and we were loved. And as adults, we're now able to form healthy emotional bonds and attachments with other people, with friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, work colleagues, and so on. John Balby found that for children that are denied this, they are separated from their primary carers at key points in their childhood, or they grow up in children's homes and institutions where they have many, many different carers, many, many staff coming and going, changing shifts. They have volunteers coming and going, maybe staying for 3 months, bonding with them, then leaving. They're not able to form these healthy emotional attachments. And this affects them significantly later in life. They may look like normal people, they may sound like normal people, but actually they've been severely psychologically damaged. They suffer from high levels of depression, anxiety, aggression, antisocial behaviour. He even found that he's looked at groups of criminals, people who got involved in conflict with the law, and he found that there was a much higher proportion of people who were criminals who'd grown up in children's homes or had suffered serious attachment disorders than those who grew up in healthy, loving families. Now, as somebody who works in child welfare and child protection, I'd always known about John Bowlby, I'd known about attachment theory. There are many other writers that have written after him and have proved his theory. There's more than half a century now of evidence to prove his theory. It's still the dominant theory in child development. It's not some alternative theory that a few people talk about. It's widely accepted by psychologists, social workers, as the dominant theory in how to raise young children. But it wasn't until I came to Nepal and started working with young people in their late teens, in their early 20s, who had grown up in children's homes and orphanages, that I started to really see attachment disorders in real life. I started to really experience what John Bowlby and others were talking about. I met many young people who were very angry and confused about their identity, who'd grown up in children's homes. They weren't sure where they came from. Did they come from Humla? Did they come from Kathmandu? When they went back to Humla, they couldn't speak the local language, they didn't know the local culture. They were angry with their parents, they were angry with the children's homes, the orphanage they grew up in. They were angry with organisations like ours that were trying to help them, because we were authority figures in their lives, and they needed something to be angry towards, somebody to be angry towards. So these young people often would, some cases they'd actually get involved in crime. I knew one young person who ended up in prison because he had everything going for him. He had a scholarship. He was going to university, but he ended up getting involved in a gang and broke into someone's house. So I saw lots of cases where these young people ended up were very unhappy or getting involved in antisocial behaviour. If you don't believe me or believe John Bowlby, I've got a quote here from a young person called Kaji. He's a friend of mine, and he grew up in a children's home. And I think he expresses this better than I can. I'll read you the quote for those of you sitting at the back. He's talking about his experience of growing up in a children's home where lots of volunteers were coming and going, and how he feels about it. Kaji says, "There were so many volunteers, short time, long time, middle time, according to visa. Sometimes they organise program and I don't want to go. Children sometimes feel angry because they want to do what they want. There is a nice movie and the children they want to watch, but volunteers organise a football program and house managers say, 'You have to go,' and all the children were angry. Why foreigners come to Nepal? Why do they go to orphanage? That time they come for short time and they give love to us. But then they leave, and when I write, they don't reply. I say to volunteer, 'Sister, I'm very lonely.' And they say, 'No problem, I'm here.' But then they go to their country, and I write, but they don't reply. When I was little, everyone can love me. Now I am big and I need love." Which I think sums it up, how many of these young people who are cute little kids that hang out with volunteers, hang out in children's homes and seem like the nicest kids in the world, what happens to them when they become adults? There are many young people in Nepal today like Kajit. Now, John Bowlby's theories and theories of attachment disorders are relevant to any country, any culture, any society, Nepal just as much as anywhere else. But I think the importance of growing up in a family is particularly important in Nepal because of the culture here, because of the importance of family in Nepali society. Nepal's not like countries in Europe or Australia or America where there are welfare systems to take care of people who are vulnerable. If you get sick, it's hard to get free healthcare or good quality healthcare. In Nepal, your marriage is very, very important for you and your family and your well-being, your livelihood. And your family are the people that arrange your marriage. It's your family that may help you try and find your first job, that may train you in how to look after the farm. Remember, most people in Nepal are still farmers, are still working on the land. If you grow up in a children's home, you don't learn those skills. And neither of you got a family that can help you get a job in Kathmandu. And unemployment here is very, very high. You need that kind of help. So your family in Nepal is effectively the welfare state. It's effectively the welfare system. And if people don't have families to support them, they lose that. They lose all those benefits. Finally, the law supports everything I'm saying. International law and Nepali law. The United Nations Conventions of the Right of the Child is very clear that children's homes should be a last resort, that all efforts should be made for every child in the world to keep them with a family so far as possible. And it states that if a child is separated from a family, every effort should be made by governments, organisations, individuals to try and help that child get back to their family, or if not their own family, another family. In every situation, children should always grow up with families so far as possible, according to the United Nations Conventions of the Right of the Child. This is also reflected in the United Nations Guidelines for the Alternative Care of Children. It's also reflected in Nepali law. There's Nepali guidelines for children's homes called the Operational Standards for the Management of Childcare Residential Homes. And it says there very clearly that no children's home should take a child unless they can be absolutely sure there's no other alternative for that child. And they've checked the child's background, and if they find the family, they take the child back. It should be a temporary resort. In practice, that rarely happens with most children's homes in Nepal. Some do it, but not many. Most will just take children. In many cases, actively look for children to bring on board. Nepal's child policy says the same thing. So the law completely reflects the academic evidence, the evidence of people like myself working in child protection in Nepal. Children's homes should be a last resort. Now you're probably thinking, I'm a tourist in Nepal, I'm a volunteer in Nepal, I live in Nepal, I'm an expat, or I run an NGO, or I work for an NGO, what's this got to do with me? Okay, I agree, child trafficking is bad, obviously I don't want to support that, and I get your points about family-based care, but how am I connected to this? Well, let me tell you a bit about voluntourism and its connections with child trafficking. I'm going to give you a case study to illustrate this. This is a picture of, Jessica's the blonde girl on the left-hand side, and Jessica's from Australia. She was doing a round-the-world trip in 2006, and part of her round-the-world trip, she wanted to give back. She wanted to do something good for society, good for the world, so she decided she wanted to volunteer. So she signed up with a volunteering company, and they placed her in an orphanage called Mukti Nepal, which was in Kathmandu. She met another Australian girl there called Nicole, and Nicole wrote a very detailed blog about their 12 weeks at Mukti Nepal, so we know a lot about their experiences from this blog. They had a wonderful time at Mukti Nepal, a bit like Connor and Fareed. In fact, they were here at the same time. They were working with orphans from the Civil War, as far as they were concerned, children that had no other option. They took them to school, they played with them, they cared for them, they had a wonderful time with them. And they were really inspired by the lady who ran the orphanage, a lady called Goma Luitel. Goma is the lady in the blue dress in the picture. And Nicole writes a lot about how inspiring she found Goma, that Goma had dedicated her life to looking after these orphans. She was a selfless woman who was putting so much of her time and effort to help these orphans. And they were so inspired that they helped Goma raise money. They even wrote letters to ex-volunteers to ask for money for the orphanage, to help the children. Nicole talks about, you can see in this quote, how wonderful it would be if she could achieve something really significant to help these children and help Nepal while she was here. They even helped Goma arrange some inter-country adoptions, so some kind foreigners could come and adopt some of these orphans and give them a better life in America or Spain. And at the end of the 12 weeks, they left. And I don't think that Jessica or Nicole have any idea what was going to happen in Mukti Nepal. So let's fast forward 4 years to 2010. By 2010, Goma Luitel had become a very wealthy woman. She's reported to have been wearing very nice clothes and jewellery. She lived in a big house. She'd actually managed to secure one core donor for the whole of the orphanage, a lady from Spain who'd adopted a child from Spain, from Nepal, and taken the child to Spain. But she was still asking for volunteers to raise money for her. Volunteers were writing money to other ex-volunteers and other people asking to donate to the orphanage. So even though she had enough money, she was still trying to raise money. And it transpired that behind this facade of this kind, caring, selfless social worker, Goma Luitel was a very unpleasant woman. When the foreigners were not around, she was hitting the children and beating them. She was spitting on them, she was calling them names, she was treating them very badly. It transpired that a number of the parents of the children, because they weren't orphans, in fact, most of them were not orphans. They had families, they had parents. They were coming to the orphanage trying to get in, trying to get access to the children and being turned away. There was one parent who even had to go into disguise and try and become like a cleaner to work in the orphanage just so she could see her children, so she could get access to her own children. When the parents tried to take their children out of Mukti, Nepal, they were threatened. Goma told them, I have political connections, you can't take your children out, they're with me now. Don't think about it. You're not getting your children back. In late 2010, Goma went too far. There was a girl at the orphanage who was unfortunately involved in a road accident on her way home from school. Instead of taking her to the hospital, Goma took her back to the orphanage and she placed her on the roof of the orphanage. And she left her there and said, you stay here until you get better. She didn't get better, her condition worsened. She then sent up the other children with nettles and iron rods and forced them to beat the girl. The girl's condition worsened further, and eventually a visitor was at the orphanage, saw the girl in a terrible state, lying on the roof, got her to a hospital, but it was too late. She sadly died in the hospital. The police investigated the case, and Goma managed to persuade them that she was in no way involved in the girl's death, that the girl had died of natural causes. As Goma said herself, she had political connections. She managed to make the problem go away. Life in the orphanage continued as normal. Fortunately, it wasn't too long afterwards that a German volunteer who'd volunteered there previously came back for a visit, and finally the children couldn't hold back the secrets any longer, and they began to open up to this German volunteer. The German volunteer did the right thing. She went to the government, she went to the IGO, she went to an organisation called Terre des Hommes. They went to the government and worked with the government, and they managed to effect a rescue of these children from Mukti, Nepal. Next Generation Nepal was involved in that rescue, and 20 children were taken to our transit home so they could be rehabilitated. They received counselling, medical support, social support to help them get over the trauma of what they'd been involved with and what they'd witnessed. I'm very pleased to say that 18 of those children are now living happily and safely back with their families, with their parents. If some of them didn't have parents or were orphans, we were able to reunify them with uncles and aunts, older siblings, cousins, and so on. There were 2 children we couldn't reunify because Goma had faked their paperwork, so we didn't know where they were from, and they were too young when they were taken for them to remember where they were from. We searched for about 3 years. We did TV adverts, everything, but we couldn't find their families. So there's no reason to believe they don't have families. They probably do, but we just can't find them. Now the point is that those 20 children in Mukti, Nepal didn't need to be there. They had families that could care for them. The only reason they were there was because Goma Luatel was using them as poverty commodities. She was using them as fundraising tools so that kind, caring, genuine people like Jessica and Nicole would donate money and give money to her so she could make a profit. Jessica and Nicole believed they were helping these children. They had no other option to be there. They didn't realise that, in fact, the very fact they were there and paying for this experience was creating the incentive for people like Goma to traffic children and bring them to orphanages. Now, this case study is a particularly nasty one. This does happen in Nepal. There are many other cases like it. But I should also make the point that there are many children's homes where there isn't this level of physical abuse. Maybe the children are treated quite well, they have nice clothes, they go to a good school, but they've still been trafficked and they've still been threatened and told you can't tell the truth to the foreign volunteers, the foreign donors. One of the other talks you're going to hear later in the series of Wisdom Wednesdays is by an organisation called Forget Me Not. And this is an example of a very well-run children's home where the children had everything they needed. They were being well cared for materially, but actually this hid an underlying problem where the kids had actually been trafficked and they had been threatened and they've been told you're not allowed to go back to your parents, and and parents have been coming to the children's home and trying to get in and been turned away. So it's not just the so-called bad children's homes where this is happening, it's happening in the so-called good children's homes as well. So let me give you a few facts about children's homes and orphanages in Nepal. According to the most recent government statistics, there's 577 registered children's homes in Nepal, and they contain 16,400 children. The most recent data we've got, which is a little old now, it goes back to 2008, which is at the end of the Civil War, it suggests that 85% of children living in children's homes and orphanages are not in fact orphans. They have one or two living parents. Now this data was from 2008, at the end of the Civil War, when in fact there was probably much more of a chance that the kids would be orphans. Now we've had a period of nearly 10 years of peace. There's less chance the children will be orphans now. So if anything, that figure will be higher now. So the vast majority of kids living in children's homes and orphanages are not orphans. And as we know, even if they are orphans, there's lots of evidence to suggest they could live with other family members. These are just the official statistics. There are many illegal children's homes in Nepal and unregistered children's homes. It's very easy to set up a children's home. All you have to do is hire a building, put a signboard outside with the name of your children's home, traffic some kids or do a deal with a trafficker to get some kids. Hey presto, you've got a children's home. You can then start advertising to volunteers, you can start advertising to donors, and you can start bringing in money to fund your children's home. If the kids are sick or if they're poor or you haven't got very good conditions, it doesn't really matter, because that creates an even greater incentive, a greater advertising pitch to try and persuade people to give you money. Another shocking statistic is that around 80% of children's homes in Nepal are located in the top 5 tourist districts. There are 75 districts in Nepal. But for some reason, the vast majority of children's homes and orphanages are located in Kathmandu, Bhaktapur, Lalitpur, Kaski, which is where Pokhara is, and Chitwan. Now we think that's no coincidence. This doesn't reflect where the greatest need is, and it doesn't reflect where the kids actually come from. The kids come from other districts, but they're brought to these 5 key tourist districts where most foreign donors and volunteers go to be put in children's homes. It seems as though the children's homes are being set up in areas where the foreign donors and volunteers go, as opposed to being set up in areas where the greatest need is. It's very, very easy to volunteer in a children's home in Nepal. If you do a Google search for Nepal volunteer, you will be given options like this. Places in orphanages where you'll be told you can make a real difference in children's lives by spending a few weeks volunteering with orphans or destitute children. Even if you hadn't thought of volunteering in an orphanage, even if you just thought, I want to do something good, I want to help Nepal, and you just put in volunteer Nepal, one of the main options you'll be given is orphanages. You'll be marketed at, you'll be persuaded that orphanages are one of the best ways you can volunteer. So even if the idea hadn't crossed your mind before, it will still be put in your mind by the volunteering companies. If you're not that well organised, you're a backpacker, you're living for the day, you arrive in Nepal, you haven't planned anything, you'll see notices like this one on the right, advertising for volunteers in children's homes. If you go to some of the cafes around here, you'll see these notices. They're everywhere. In some ways, the more amateur they look, the more people are persuaded, oh, this must be a genuine organisation that hasn't got a lot of money. I'll work at this kind of children's home. So it's very easy to volunteer in children's homes. So sadly, for many children's homes and orphanages in Nepal, not all children's homes and orphanages, there are some good children's homes and orphanages, I don't want to give you the wrong impression, but for very many of them, it's a business. They're being run as a business. It's a profit-making business whereby you can persuade poor, naive families to let you take their children, put them in a children's home or orphanage on the promise of a good education, and people will, poor, naive, the well-intentioned Nepali families will pay traffickers for that. And then you can persuade rich but naive foreign tourists and volunteers to volunteer in the children's home and pay for the experience. And these volunteers and donors are also well-intentioned. They also mean the best for these children. But unfortunately, the Nepali families and the volunteers and donors are all being scammed. They're all being scammed out of money so that someone can make a lot of money out of these children. They can use them as property commodities. In many cases, children's homes and orphanages are a business. Their priority is making money as opposed to helping children. We don't have any accurate statistics to show how much this business is worth in Nepal, the orphanage business, but we do have some statistics to show how much the voluntourism industry is worth globally. It's thought that about 1.6 million people are participating in voluntourism in projects around the world every year. And it's thought that this business may be worth up to $2 billion. $2 billion, it's a lot of money. It's very different from how volunteering used to be maybe 30 years ago, where you found an organisation you cared about and you volunteered for free, you didn't work. The companies have realised there's a lot of money to be made from volunteering. As we enter into a post-materialist society in the West, where people are tired of buying things, they don't want more material possessions, they want experiences, they want to do something good, and they're willing to pay for that. The companies have cottoned onto that and have found ways of making money out of this, have found ways of making money out of people's compassion. Now, I'm not saying that voluntourism is bad. I'm going to come on to talk about why I still believe in volunteering, and I think it can be good. But we all need to keep in mind that it is a business. It is about making money for many of these companies, as opposed to genuinely helping vulnerable people in some cases. Now, people often say to me, well, what about the good children's homes? You say there are some good children's homes in Nepal that genuinely care for children. They do all these checks, they check that the children are from, don't have families, or if they do have families, they keep them in touch with the families, and there are places like this. And they say, well, can I volunteer in one of the good children's homes? Martin, can you just give me some of the names of the good children's homes? And I'm going to volunteer there, I'll avoid the bad ones. Unfortunately, this doesn't solve the problem. It would be nice if it did, but it doesn't solve the problem. Even if you can prove that a children's home hasn't displaced or trafficked children, it's still not a good idea to volunteer there. Volunteering in a children's home still means that you're going to have a roster of volunteers coming and going, which is going to create psychological attachment disorders in children. It's much better if these children's homes have Nepali staff that speak the local language, understand the local culture, and are there for a long period of time, for years, so they can build healthy emotional attachments with these children. Volunteering for 3 months and bonding with a child is great while you're there. The minute you go, it causes incredible grief for that child. Then the next volunteer comes and they bond with the child, then they go. And after a while, children learn not to form attachments with people, which is attachment disorder, and that affects them later in life. So it's still not good, it still creates psychological harm for children. However nice it might feel at the time, and however much a difference you might think you're making. And as I say, I volunteered in an orphanage, I've been there, I've done it, I thought I was making a huge difference. I look back now, and I regret it. I realised I was in an orphanage for a month, I bonded with the kids, we had a nice goodbye party, I thought I'd touched their lives. You know, but people were coming and going. It really didn't help those kids in the long run. I was one of maybe hundreds of tourists doing that. Another issue is that many volunteers, although they're well-intentioned, they don't have the skills to work with vulnerable children. In countries in Europe, in Australia, North America, New Zealand, unskilled volunteers would never be allowed to work with children who've lost their parents, or who've been trafficked, or had suffered terrible trauma in their lives. Only skilled people will be allowed to do that. But for some reason, in developing countries like Nepal, it's somehow considered acceptable. But my question is, why would we think that it's acceptable to do that with Nepali children, but not with children in Europe or America? Do we think that Nepali children are somehow worth less? It's not as important to have the same standards that we'd apply in Western countries? I don't think so. It should be the same standards in Nepal as anywhere else. Another problem is that whilst the vast majority of volunteers have very good intentions, they genuinely want to help children in need, unfortunately there are some volunteers that are less well-intentioned. There are people that want to come intentionally to abuse children, paedophiles. Sadly, this is a growing problem in Nepal and other countries. Particularly in Nepal, it's a problem because there isn't a lot of regulation here. It's very easy to abuse children here if you want to. I know of many stories I hear from other child protection colleagues of foreigners coming to Tamil, and it's very easy to find a child that you can take to a hotel room and abuse, or go to an orphanage and abuse children if you pay a bit of extra money. Now, I'm not saying that any of you are going to do that, and I'm not saying that the majority of tourists do that. They don't. It's a minority, a tiny minority. But the very fact that you're part of a system which doesn't do proper child protection checks, you're complicit in a system which is allowing this to happen. And we shouldn't stand for it. Again, in Western countries, there'll be proper child protection procedures, often in Nepal there's not. Or sometimes organisations will say, we've got a child protection policy, that's fine, we've done our bit. You can still go there and volunteer without a problem. Finally, it's important that Nepali children have Nepali staff that understand their culture, that understand their language to care for them. I've seen many cases of children who've been brought up in children's homes by many, many foreigners from Europe, Australia, America, Canada, and they know a lot about life in America, but they really struggle back in Nepal because they haven't really been brought up in a Nepali cultural context. They almost find it hard to re-engage with Nepal. I've seen cases of children's homes where children have worn Western clothes and watched Western TV, and kind foreign donors have given them these things, thinking they're helping them. Then they leave, they're adults, and they don't know how to survive in Nepal. And they're not going to be able to get visas to go to America to live there. So it's a real problem for them. So in summary, I'm afraid to say that we don't endorse volunteering in orphanages. It can create child trafficking, it can create separation of children from their families, it can create psychological attachment disorders, and in the worst case, it can leave the door open to child abuse. Okay, so how are you feeling now? Pretty depressed, I imagine. Okay, well, I think it's time for a bit of good news. Despite all these problems, I still believe in volunteering. Yeah, I genuinely do believe in volunteering. I genuinely believe that volunteering can make a positive difference to the world and can make a positive difference to Nepal. And I'm now going to try and pick you up again and tell you how and why I think volunteering can be a good thing, can be practiced ethically. Now, the first thing I want to say is that ethical volunteering is not about one-way traffic. It's not about a volunteer going and saving some poor beneficiaries. We need to get over these ideas of the donor and the beneficiary, or the giver and the receiver. True ethical volunteering should be more about a balance, about giving and receiving. There isn't one person that knows more than the other person, who can help more than the other person. It's a transaction. Unfortunately, there are many arguments, and many people argue that volunteering is a byproduct of colonialism. It goes back to these ideas of Western nations colonizing the world to try and to make them sophisticated, to civilize them, to teach them Western culture, Western manners. And even though we don't actively colonize countries anymore, there are many of these byproducts where we believe that just because I'm white and I'm from Britain, I'm somehow going to have skills that Nepal needs. And we need to get over those ideas. Nepal is an incredibly complex country and with many problems, and it has many very, very intelligent people within Nepal trying to solve those problems. There are very many educated Nepalis, and they can't solve Nepal's problems. So a 19-year-old who's fresh out of college has got very little work experience, is not going to be able to come in and save Nepal. I'm afraid to tell you. I'm not saying that there isn't a role you can play, but you're not going to be able to solve what incredibly intelligent people like Arjun, for example, a friend of mine in the audience who's got a PhD in these issues, and he can't solve these problems in Nepal. So people like me definitely won't be able to solve problems in Nepal. We need to get over these ideas and see it more as a transaction. I think true ethical volunteering is more about a cultural dialogue. It's about people from foreign countries coming into a country like Nepal and getting to understand Nepal, getting to learn from Nepal, making Nepali friends. And at the same time, as well as the learning that they are getting from Nepal and the experiences they're getting, local people get to learn about life in America or life in Australia or life in Europe. And they can share perspectives, share ideas. And whilst foreign volunteers can share some of their skills and experiences, local people can teach foreigners their experiences as well. I was also a volunteer in a school in India with Tibetan refugees. I like to think I made a difference there. I'm not sure I did. But I can tell you that I certainly learned a lot about Tibetan refugees and Tibetan culture and Indian culture. I learned how to make momos, and I learned all sorts of things, probably much more serious things about me and about the world, which I was able to carry forward. And I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't done that. So in many ways, my volunteering experience was an experience for me to learn. And I hope that they also got something from me in terms of maybe my English language skills and the experiences I shared with the kids. But whilst at the time everyone patted me on the back and said, well done, Martin, you're going to save India and help these poor refugees who have nothing. Well done, they really need people like you. And I believed that rhetoric, I believed that discourse. I now look back and think that was silly. I was 18 at the time, I really had nothing to offer. And I was volunteering with people who'd come from Tibet, who'd lost their country, who'd had many more life experiences with me. And in many ways, they had a lot more to teach me than I had to teach them. So it's about changing your mindset and seeing it as a transaction, seeing it as a much more balanced approach of giving and receiving on both sides. A transfer of skills. There's lots of evidence that volunteering increases your self-confidence and your happiness levels. That's great, but that should be the same on both sides. The people in the country you're volunteering with should also increase their self-confidence and happiness. They should get something out of it. And it will enhance your career, and I think sometimes people pretend that their volunteering experiences are purely altruistic, when in fact often it is about getting experience on your CV, and that's fine. Let's go into that openly and transparently. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're transparent about it. But let's hope that people locally also get something from that. So it's about readjusting your mindset. I'm going to give you a few practical examples now of what ethical volunteering is. First of all, as you've heard me say, but I'll say it again, don't volunteer in an orphanage. That's a black and white issue. Volunteering in orphanages is never a good thing unless you are a skilled professional. You're a social worker, you're a psychologist, and in those cases, it's good if you work with the local staff and train the local staff so you're actually helping the whole thing become sustainable. We actually had a very qualified psychologist that volunteered with us, and she trained the local staff. She did have some contact with the children, very little, but she was always supervised, and the only reason she did that so she could understand the issues the staff faced, and then she trained the staff. But she was an eminently qualified psychologist in the US that had 50 years experience or something. She was a 70-year-old lady who did this. She was an ethical volunteer, and that's probably the only time I've ever seen someone work in an orphanage in Nepal where it's ethical, but there are cases like that. The second thing I'm going to say is adopt a learning mindset. In the United States, people often call volunteering service learning. The idea that you give service and in return you learn something. You learn something about yourself, something useful for you. There's a new philosophy led by a number of thought leaders in this sector that talk about learning service. The idea that before you go in and say, I can serve you, I can solve your problems, you go in and you say, actually, let me learn from you. You teach me. I want to understand what your problems are, what your lifestyle's about. If I can learn about your problems, then maybe there's something I can give. Maybe not. Maybe later in life there's something I can give. When I reevaluate my own experiences volunteering in a Tibetan refugee school in India, I look back and I think, well, hopefully I taught some English and hopefully I taught something, but really they probably taught me much more. I got a lot of learning from that. And actually I'm using that experience later in life by working in a country like Nepal. So the experience I got did help, and hopefully I'm doing something now useful in Nepal. So the key is people need to go in with a mindset of learning about issues and learning about the local context, the local culture, before they go in with the view that I can solve your problems, I can save the world. It's shifting your whole mindset. Research and understanding. If you are going to volunteer, it's really important that you do your research. If you're passionate about animals, research what ethical volunteering means in the context of animals. I'm talking about child protection issues here, but if you had an animal rights activist up here, they could tell you a whole load of other issues around animal rights and volunteering. That's a whole other area which I won't be talking about tonight because I'm not an expert on it, but there are issues there. But the important thing is the information is available online. 10 years ago it wasn't. These days it is. If you do a few Google searches and you use your intelligence, you'll find the information. You can find which approaches work and don't work, what's ethical, what's perhaps not so ethical. And then sign up with a volunteering company that offers an ethical approach. A friend of mine in the UK often talks about, she calls it the 90-second rule. She says if you can go online and you can find a volunteering company which you can fill in their form and be accepted within 90 seconds, there's something wrong. You haven't done your research, and they haven't done their research about you. You could be anybody. They should be asking you questions as well about who you are and what skills you've got to find the right fit. Suitability of your skills. It's kind of obvious, really, isn't it? That you need to think about what skills you've got. If you're an accountant, you could offer great financial support to a local NGO here that's struggling with their finances. If you're a web designer, you could help a local NGO set up their website. If you're an IT technician, you could go in and sort out all the old computers that we have in Nepal that break all the time. I wish I had an IT consultant earlier on today because this computer broke and we needed someone here who could solve the problem. These are the kind of issues we face in Nepal, and these are the issues that local people face. And many people from foreign countries have these skills, and they need to think about the skills they've got and where their skills can be needed, can be used. Think about the sustainability of your work. Are you putting a local person out of a job by volunteering? Or are you actually training a local person so that they can enhance their career and they can carry on your work after you've gone? I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment. Ethical tourism. Many people these days feel that when they come to a country like Nepal, they feel this ethical obligation that they have to volunteer. It's become almost a trend that you can't just come here and be a tourist. You can't just go trekking and visit the sites and go to nice restaurants. I have to give something back, I have to volunteer. Actually, that's not the case. The very fact that you are here in Nepal as a tourist, particularly at this time after the earthquake when tourism is down, you're spending money, you're engaging with local people. Nepali people are so grateful you're here. You're boosting the local economy, you're showing other tourists that it's safe to come to Nepal. Simply by being a tourist in Nepal, you're helping this country. And actually that's fine. If that's all you want to do, it's fine. Don't feel you need to volunteer necessarily. If you really want to, fine, look into it. But it's fine just to be an ethical tourist. Sadly, I've spoken to some people that have said to me, well, I just wanted to travel. I just wanted to see Nepal, but everyone said to me, oh, you can't go to a country like that and not do something and not help. So I felt I had to spend a few days volunteering. And I think that's really sad, because it's not actually the case. It's fine just to come here and learn and meet local people and spend money. Most people in Nepal will be really grateful to you if you do that, actually. The last thing I need to say is about the law in Nepal. Not many people realise this, but actually on a tourist visa, it's technically illegal to volunteer in Nepal. Yeah, not many people realise that. In reality, of course, there's a huge industry around volunteering. You just have to walk out here and there'll be touts offering you volunteering placements. And the government, for the large part, overlook these issues. Now, legally, I have to tell you that because I wouldn't be responsible if I didn't, and I can't endorse volunteering because of that. But I can tell you that most people do it. It's widely accepted. The government largely turn a blind eye to it. And I would say, if you do choose to volunteer, do so ethically and follow the advice we're giving you. It's a short case study. This is Maria. She's from London. She actually came to Nepal a few years ago, and she came to me and said, "Oh, I love the work that NGN's doing. I love children. I'd love to volunteer with you." And I thought, okay, here we go. I'm going to have to reject another volunteer and explain all this again. And I said, "Well, what do you do? What skills do you have?" And she said, "Well, actually, I'm a trainer, and I train people in Microsoft packages in London." I was like, right, fantastic. That's great. We have young people that we give scholarships to. They're doing diplomas and bachelor degrees, and they have to work on Word and Excel. They have to write reports, but they're not very good at it. We have staff that have to write reports from the field and use Word. They have to write financial reports in Excel. So I said, "Maria, would you like to run 2 weeks training to all our young people, all our staff?" And she was like, "Yeah, that would be great." So we set her up in a room in our office, and she ran some fantastic training courses to our young people. And our report writing has got much better now, and our young people doing scholarships are doing great work. And Maria learned a lot from it as well. She learned about the challenges of running a training course in a country like Nepal, where the electricity goes out every 5 minutes, and you don't have all the nice colourful pens and resources that you have in London. She went out for lunch every day with her training participants. She learned about their lives. They took her out and they showed her things in Nepal. She made friends. She learned a lot from it as well. So she got the experience she wanted. She got actually a really genuine experience of working with local people and learning about their lives and seeing what it's like to be a trainer in Nepal, which is very different from London. Maria, for me, is a wonderful ethical volunteer. That's what volunteers should be doing, this type of work, thinking about what they've got to offer and coming here with the right attitude to see where they fit and being willing to learn as well as give something back. I've talked a lot about volunteers. I just want to say a few words about donors as well, because some people don't volunteer in children's homes and orphanages, but they donate money to children's homes and orphanages. Now, as I say, there are some good children's homes and orphanages in Nepal, and they do need funds, and I don't want in any way to stop people giving to those children's homes and orphanages. But for many, many cases, it is about making money, and the very fact you're giving money to a children's home or orphanage, you're giving them more money so they can displace more children and keep them in an orphanage. I've met people who've said to me, you know, if I can just raise another $1,000, I can build a new room or a new building next to my orphanage, and we can get some more kids, and we can bring them from the villages, and we can give them an education. And I want to stress, for a lot of people in the business, they're not necessarily bad people. A lot of people in Nepal genuinely think they're helping children when they displace children from villages. Some of them really are unpleasant people like Govaluatel, but many of them genuinely think they're helping children by taking them away from their families and helping them get an education. But in the long run, we're not really helping Nepal, we're not really helping those people by donating money. So if you do want to support a project in Nepal, an ethical project that involves children, think about projects which keep children with their families. So projects that train people in small businesses, like in villages, small shops or goat rearing or vegetable farming, so they can make a bit of money, they have more money, and then they're more likely to keep their children with them. It boosts the local economy. Improving health facilities and educational facilities. If the schools and the health facilities were really good in villages, far less children would be trafficked, because there wouldn't be the incentive, there wouldn't be the push factor to push children away from their families. Women's empowerment, helping women have the skills to be able to argue with their husbands who might be saying, let's send the children away to Kathmandu for an education. Giving them the confidence to keep their children with them when the trafficker comes knocking on their door. Family preservation, social work projects. In the same way as in Western countries, we have families that have problems, alcoholism, domestic violence. We don't just take their children away, we work with them. We help those families in ways so they can stay together, the children can stay there. And it's exactly the same in Nepal. There's some great organisations here doing that kind of work, helping families and communities stay together, rather than separating them. Okay, I'm almost finished now. I'm just going to finish with a quote by Osho, who's a kind of guru from India, where he says, if you have become aware that the world needs a great change, then you are the closest world to yourself. Start from there. And I think what Osho is saying in this context is that if you really want to make a difference to the world, you want to volunteer, you want to help in some way, you want to give back, before you start thinking about the external world, look at yourself. Become mindful of yourself and what you are trying to achieve, what your attitude and approach is to trying to give back, trying to help other people. Be mindful of what your motivations are. Are you doing this so that you can do something for your CV, you can improve your experiences? If so, that's fine, but go into it honestly. Be honest about that with yourself and others. That's okay. Think about what skills you've got. Think about what you can offer. Maybe if you haven't got skills, maybe now's not quite the right time. Maybe you just need to go and live in a Nepali village for a while. Learn about the local culture, see what the situation is, and then see if there's something you can do. So look at yourself. Look at what skills you have, what your approach is, what your attitude is to volunteering, before you rush out trying to save the world. Look at the people you want to help. Look at what their needs are. Again, learn from them before you rush in trying to help. See what they tell you their needs are. Just because someone says, I'm going to come in and we're going to build you a school, or we're going to build you a well. Maybe they don't need a school, maybe they don't need a well. Or if you do build them a school, you're going to take them away from the school the kids are already going to in the next village and there's good teachers. And you build a school, the minute you leave, there's no teachers to run that school and everything collapses. Listen to what their needs are, listen to what the problems are, understand them. And finally, be mindful of the broader social issues. 10 years ago, I think it was acceptable to rush into a volunteering project without understanding these broader ethical issues. These days, I don't think it's acceptable. The information is out there. There's talks like this, there's a lot of information online, there's publications. If you want to volunteer, if you want to help, do your research. As NGOs, when we work in a country like Nepal, we are required to carry out research first and consult with local people. We have to work with local organisations. These days, foreigners never go out to villages looking for children's families. It's the poorly staffed that do that, because it's much more appropriate and much more effective. And it's the same principle with volunteering. Think about the broader social issues, understand the broader social issues before rushing into help. If you can approach volunteering in this way, then I think it can make a big difference. It can make a big difference to you, it can make a big difference to the communities you want to help, and it can make a big difference to the world. Ethical volunteering is possible, it can be done, and I encourage you to do it, and I encourage you to learn more about the subject and try it. I don't want to stop you volunteering. Don't volunteer in an orphanage, but do practice volunteering. Thank you very much.